Welcome to the fifth and final build video for my entry into the Great Guitar Build-Off. In this video we're going to get the neck carved, pickup cavities cut, and finally get this whole guitar finished. Let's start with the pickup cavities. Off camera I first laid out the location of the cavities and then attached the routing template. With a Forstner bit I'll first remove the bulk of the material before finally routing the cavity. After the cavities are routed, a hole is then drilled as a pass-through for the neck pickup wire to get into the body cavity. Let's jump forward to carving the neck. The first thing I do is thickness the neck at the 1st and 12th fret locations, bringing it down to the final thickness. Once I'm at proper thickness of those two locations, I'll then flatten the area between them, bringing everything down to the final thickness. Once everything is fully thicknessed, I'll then start the faceting process. I end up cutting about 3 facets in each side of the neck before moving on to final shaping. In the case of this neck, I'll be carving it to be similar to a 50s era Gibson neck shape, so I'll be using a template to help the final shaping process. This template gives me a proper shape for the neck at both the 1st and 12th fret locations, and I'll go ahead and shape the neck to match the template in those locations and then kind of flatten everything between to get a nice shape. Once I have the neck carved, I'll then fine-tune the carving, looking for any high or low spots by both eye and touch. Here I'm using a pencil to blacken the surface to show low spots as I go ahead and sand it down with a sanding block. Once the initial flattening is done, I'll switch to a finer grit sandpaper and a longer sanding block to further ensure the neck is truly flat. Moving on to fretting, I'll first run a triangular file through the fret slots to slightly round over the tops of the slots. This will help with both installation and removal of the frets if a refret is ever needed. Now to prep the frets themselves. First the wire is bent to the proper radius, then cut to length and detanged at the ends for the bound fretboard. Most of this was done off camera just to save some time. When I install stainless steel frets as I am here, I have a particular method that I like to use. I had some problems in the past with stainless steel frets lifting on me after they were installed, and once I came up with this method that seemed to stop. So the first thing I'll do is go ahead and press the frets in just as you usually would. The ends are then cut and filed flush. I will then press the frets in a second time, making sure they're fully seated. I will then use some thin superglue and wick it under the frets to both fill any gaps between the fret tang and the wood surrounding it, and to ensure that the fret's not going to move. While this glue is setting up, I'll go ahead and use the fret press to basically clamp the fret down as a final assurance that the fret is properly seated and that it's going to stay that way. Once I have the frets properly installed, I then bevel the ends with my beveling file. Then finally it's time to make these two pieces into one guitar. Now for one of my favorite parts of guitar building, sanding. Okay, enough of that. Let's just move on. Finish time. First I'll be applying a coat of varnish oil blend, and I'm really just doing this to enhance the color of the natural wood. If you remember back to the beginning of this build, I said it was going to be a very experimental build for me, and this finish is one of those experiments. If you haven't noticed yet, that is a bottle of super glue in my hand. Yes, I'm going to be applying a super glue finish to this whole guitar. To start that finish, I'm going to go ahead and apply 2 coats of a water-thin super glue, and the idea behind that is that it's going to soak in a bit and give me a good adhesion level. After a light sanding, I'll go ahead and apply a heavy coat of a medium thickness super glue now. Again, some more sanding and then one final coat of thick super glue just to get some thickness to that finish, so I'll have some room for the final sanding. Now for more sanding. I went ahead and first started with 220 grit just to kind of get everything leveled out. Then I moved my way through the grits up to 2500 grit. Then finally I hand buffed it to a high shine. Well, here's the result. At this point I'd say superglue works pretty well. Now with the finish sorted, I moved on to finalizing the fretwork, first with leveling the frets. Then a recrown and a final polish, which I did off camera. Now for the final assembly, I'll start off with installing the bushings for the bridge and the tailpiece along with the grounding wire for the strings. Now for the tuners. After a quick change of scenery, it's time to install those pickups I made several months ago at the start of this competition. With no access covers, it's a bit fiddly to get all the electronics done on this, but it is doable. We're in the home stretch now. It's finally time to make the bone nut. First, after I thickness the blank and then flatten the bottom, I'll go ahead and mark out the width and the fret height using a half pencil. With the radius gauge, I'll go ahead and then mark out the approximate top of the nut as well. After getting the nut rough cut out, I'll go ahead and then mark out the string spacing. I'll then go ahead and rough cut the string slots themselves. Now on to the kind of final setup part of the nut making process. What I'm doing here is finalizing the string height of the nut, and to do this I'll first rough out the intonation, and then go ahead and check the string height itself by holding the string at the 2nd fret and kind of tapping before that to check the height above the fret. I'll go ahead and then deepen the slots as necessary to lower each string to the proper height. Once I get the string height close to being set, I'll double check the intonation and then check to see if when fretted at the 1st fret, if the string is being pulled a little bit sharp. That would be an indication to me that the string is still a hair high and will go ahead and need to be lowered a little bit further. And finally, here's the finished instrument. We'll go ahead and take a closer look at this finished instrument in the final video where I'll be demoing the instrument, as well as talking about some things I'll be changing as this moves from our prototype into my first production model.